Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to take a look at the different ways to integrate remote audio from remote guests, into productions using both VMix and TriCaster. And for this, we'll be using sort of LiveToAir as our remote guest source going through this. In addition, we will also, in the post-show, take a detailed look at our new call-in-one product, which is something we've talked about in the past, and I know there's been some real interest in the community about, so we'll be getting to that in the post-show. So before we get started, I'd like to invite everybody, please. We'd love to have you interact with us, so any comments, any questions, just post them, and we'll get to them live on air. Also, if you would like to join us live on air as a video guest here, we have a link to that in the show notes and here on the screen. So if you connect to that URL, somebody from the studio will get you on. So when we went through this is something that seems to be an area where, even though people are very comfortable integrating the video side of their remote guest, handling the audio can be challenging sometimes, and there are different reasons for that. So what I wanted to start with is a look at the different audio capabilities that are found in both VMix and TriCaster, so we can level set on what types of tools we have available to us in those platforms. We'll take a quick look at the different ways we can manage the audio on the LiveToAir side, and then we'll sort of dive into the actual configurations on all of those. So, yep. Oh, I'm told we have a caller, so. They may be, there we go.
Howdy.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. How are you doing?
Good. So what can I do for you?
I'm pleased to be joining the show. I've watched it a few times, and it's been a wonderful resource, and I really applaud you on taking the effort to make all of these and to put the show on for us. I'm particularly interested in what you're talking about this week because I'm relatively new to live streaming. I've come in from an online editing background. I was an online editor, and obviously live streaming took off quite during COVID and all the rest. So it's great. I'm really enjoying it. It's good to be, live is quite exciting, which is a new thing for me. But I've had a couple of issues with VMix call, and so I'm quite keen because I'm in South Africa and the connections are terrible. So I go in mostly over 4G connections, and I use Speedify, which is a bonding solution with VPN, and VPN's been causing quite a few issues. So I'm very interested to see how this works, and that's why I'm joining live today, because I want to see the interface from the user's perspective as well.
Okay, that's great. I mean, I'm glad that we have you on air here. One of the key things for us is just that the user experience in anything that we do, we try to think of what would be the easiest thing. How can you walk the user through the steps they need to connect? And then from the studio side, it's always around workflow. Everything. I'm sure if you've gotten into live streaming, workflow is like critical to getting that done right. So that's the other piece that we've been really focused on, product wise. But I really appreciate you calling, and we will get into all of the things around configuration for this on the audio side. So feel free, if you have any questions or anything and want to jump in, just connect back, and we'll dive into anything you want to talk about.
Lovely. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it.
Cheers. Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so I guess with that, we have a few comments that have come in already, so we'll jump on and check in with everybody here. So we have Spatial Optic says, yay, favorite show, time to get edumacated. Spatial, thank you. It's always good to have you here. We have JP. He's saying he's looking forward to tonight's topic, and that's great. Hopefully we'll cover everything you want. Bill Muse says, I like the new intro graphics. Bill, thank you. That was one of the things we put together, and we talked a bit about how we did all that on last week's show, where we went into some of DaVinci Resolve and the things we did with that as well. So let's see. We have Marco. Marco, hello. Yes, good having you on here. And Bill Mew is saying, he's coming in from Royal Tunbridge. So, Bill, thank you. Let's see. We have Randall. Oh, I think Randall's saying, looking forward to the audio insights. So, Randall, good to see you here. Eastern Shore. That's my friend Tom. Tom, good to see you, Tom. Thank you. We have Wolfgang coming to us from Germany. Very interested in LiveToAir. Discovered it by chance, but he doesn't know anybody in Germany that uses it. Must unfortunately watch the rest. So sorry if the message is cut at a later time. So, but Wolfgang, what I'd love to do is we can get you set up with a trial so you can work with it yourself. Just come online to us, neuralnet.com, and somebody will get you signed up for a trial. Let's see. We have automation for VMix. He's saying hi from Vargardena. I'm sure I'm killing that name. I apologize, from Sweden. So thank you very much, automation for VMix. And let me see. Automation. Okay, that I think is everything. So let's dive in. And where we'll get started with this is we're going to first look at VMix and the audio capabilities there. So this is something we've touched on in other shows, but we'll sort of do this as part of a complete look. So if I go over to VMix over here, and let me call up the settings. So, okay. So when you're looking at VMix, there are a range of audio settings here. And the first place where I usually start when we look at anything is making sure that you have the audio output set up, because this is really critical for everything that's done. So if you go over to, go up to settings up here, and then go into audio outputs, this is going to lay out everything that you have available to you as outputs inside of VMix. And you'll see it has a master output and headphones. That's very standard for, most things that you do. And I believe all the versions of VMix have two buses available, at least an A bus and a B bus. I know that starting in 4K, it expands that all the way up to a G bus, but you have to actually enable these buses for them to be available. So when you come in, you can just say, I just want to enable it. I just want to turn the bus on because I'm going to use this internally, or use it just as an NDI output. Or you can turn around and say, anything that I send to that bus in VMix, I want to actually send that out an I/O. So that could be anything from a Dante to a physical hardware device to speakers, anything you'd want to do. All of that is available. So when you go to set up the audio inside of VMix, this should be your first stop. Make sure you have all the buses you want enabled. If you want to route anything like out Dante, make sure you set each one of the buses to the Dante port you want, and then you should be all set. The other thing to look at when you're doing this is go up to Outputs, and down here where it says Audio Outputs, this area right here, you want to make sure that you click NDI on, because that's going to allow you to send any one of those bus outputs out NDI, and we'll have an NDI, an advertised NDI feed that you can pick up in any other application. That's something that we'll be using here for what we're going through. So that's the second thing. The third thing for working with VMix is over in the mixer. So down here, if you look at the mixer section, each channel has a little gear next to it. And in that gear, if you click on it, there's this little checkbox on the bottom which says visible in mixer. So that is something that needs to be checked. If it's unchecked, that input will disappear from the mixer and you won't see it there. So if you're looking for an input that isn't there yet, I can just go over to one of the channels. So let me see. Let me just pick a channel that might not be on. Yes, this one here. If I click here, you can go into the settings screen and go to audio settings. And in there, it'll get you in here and let you check the box if it isn't checked. So that's how you can get any one of the inputs that you want to have in your mixer and VMix set up and available. The other thing, which, let me get out of here. The other thing which is really important is something called the channel matrix. And that's something that for a lot of people, it can be very confusing. And it actually, it can be confusing for a reason. So let me just go in and explain a bit of what the channel matrix is. So I'm going to take, let's take the host here. I'm going to come in, and if you look at the side, we just had this initial pass, there's something called channel mixer and channel matrix. The channel mixer is basically saying how many inputs, how many audio inputs are coming into this channel. So that's basically, you can have feeds which have more than two inputs, more than a left and a right. You can have them with 4, 8. So there are different types of feeds coming in. In this case, this is just a 2-channel feed. But so this is showing you the audio that's coming in. The channel matrix, let me see if I can make this a little bigger here now. The channel matrix is basically saying, where do I want to allow this audio to go? And this is an important, I use the word allow very specifically. What the matrix lets you do is determine where this audio can be used. Inside the mixer, you actually get to say, I'm using that audio located in that place. So it's almost like permissioning, and the routing you have in the mixer to send something to a bus is basically your actual routing. So in here, you can see I can send things to master, I can send them to headphones, I can send them to any of the buses that we have. So these are, you know, buses A to G. So when I set up my VMix, I set it up to say, where do I want this audio to be able to go? And that's what you do in the channel matrix. When you are done with that, you can actually go into the mixer side of VMix. So let me just see if we can go to a bigger screen here. And if I go down here and I want to send my audio to a specific bus, I can send it to master A or B. And if you want to send it to more, you can just right click down here and you have all the other buses that you can send it to. So that's basically the way it's set up. Permission in the matrix and actually route it inside the mixer. So that gives you that distinction. Now, one of the things you could ask is, why would I want to turn something off? Why would I want to not send it somewhere if I can control the routing in the mixer? And that's really something about protection for where audio can go. So for instance, if you had an operator that was only going to be talking to guests, inside their mic input, you could come back and say, I want to turn this off in the mix matrix to go into my master audio. I never want this to go out on air. So if you turn it off there, nothing you do over here, you can turn around and click on master all you want. There's no audio getting into that bus. So that's a very important distinction between the two and a real use case for how you may want to set that up. So the next one I really want to talk about is what's in the TriCaster, but we do have a few more comments that I want to jump to. So let's see. We have Richard. Richard, hi, good to see you here. So he's saying he's all ears on our sound. So hopefully we don't disappoint. So we have Spatial Optic is saying he had this wrong for the longest time. So yeah, this isn't something that's like intuitively obvious, but when you understand sort of the rationale behind it, it definitely is something that makes sense to have in there as that extra layer of security in a live mixing product. Okay, so next I want to go over to the TriCaster and take a look at how audio is managed on the TriCaster side. So if we look over here, audio really is all managed down here in the TriCaster audio mixer. So let me sort of slide over a little bit, so stay in the mic. So if you look, the way this is set up is you have, in this case, 15 inputs on your microphone. 15 inputs on your mixer that you can route any sources to. So by default, it basically sort of maps the first 15 inputs to these first 15 inputs on your mixer. But you don't have to do that. So let's take a look at what actually is inside of these. So I'll just go over to one that we aren't using here so you can sort of see from the beginning. So when you set up the audio on the TriCaster, like I said, it'll just match up with the video source that comes in. But you can actually set it to any NDI feed, any audio feed that's coming in. You can set it to any local sources. So you can come back and say, you know, do I want to plug it in, take the SDI that's coming in on my back of my system. This is a TC2. You can take things from a microphone. So for instance, in a microphone, one of the things is you can plug in a USB interface into the back of the TriCaster, and you'll just see it here, and you can pull any microphone entries in. But this is basically how it works. You set things up to say, what is the input source that I want for that? When you have that set up, you can basically, like we saw in VMix, we had all the levels set up in the mixer. So I mentioned the point that audio doesn't necessarily have a single or double channel, like a mono or stereo. You can have multiple channels. In this case, the TriCaster lets you have up to 8 audio sources in a channel. 8 audio channels in a source would be a better way to put that. But the next thing you can do, and the VMix had the same thing, is they have processing, EQ, compressor. VMix has plugins and other things you can do with all of that. And then finally, and this is the most important part for what we're going to be doing with remote guest, is you have the ability to route this audio. So if you look, what it's telling you is that you can take those 8 channels of audio coming in, and you can route them to one of 4 outputs. So they have a master output and then 3 aux outputs, 3 auxiliary outputs. So you can route the audio that's coming in to any one of those. And because we said there are 8 channels inside that input source, you have this ability to map the individual channels too. So you could mix audio channels around. And this could be very, very useful if, say, you had an audio source that's coming in that has channels 1 and 2 are English, channels 3 and 4 are Spanish, and channels 5 and 6 are German, just to take examples. When I want to map this to, say, one of my aux outputs, I can turn around and say, I want to make sure that I'm taking channels 1 and 2 and aux 1. I'm going to map those to all the channels for English, and English is going to be what comes out of aux 1. I can map the German channels to aux 2 and the Spanish channels to aux 3. So it allows me to have a lot of flexibility where I can peel those individual channels out and put them anywhere I want in my feed. So I could create stereo pairs, 4 stereo pairs out of the 8 input sources coming in from a single input. And that's a good way to think about that. So one of the things that we always need to do is we need to figure out the audio that we're going to send back to our remote guest. And that's where having the ability to configure this routing, just like we talked about with the buses in VMix, becomes very important. And as I mentioned here, these are my outputs. So I have my master out, phones, aux 1, 2, and 3. And so these are all here, and they just have audio controls. They don't actually have routing. They're the end destination on any routing that we're going to be doing. All right, so let me let me do one more thing. Let me mention one more thing about the TriCaster, which is just a cool feature. One of the things you can do is you can configure all of the audio, the mixes, the routing, the levels, and everything else. And TriCaster gives you the ability to basically snapshot that. So I could come here and just do this. And what this will do is this lets me create presets. So I have up to 9 presets that I can associate with my mixer, where I can just go in and say, for this part of the show, I'm using my setup 1. And for this part of the show, I'm using setup 2. And it can change the entire configuration, including the inputs, the levels, and the routing. So that can be very useful if you're doing things like switching between panels in a production, where you can sit there and go, okay, I got panel 1, now I'm getting panel 2, and it can handle all of that. So it's a different approach than VMix, but this has its own strengths in that. So just something to keep in mind as an ability there. So the last thing I want to touch on before we get into sort of talking about configuration directly is LiveToAir and what we have with LiveToAir. So if we come over to LiveToAir over here, let me go into our settings. Okay, so here is the settings we have for audio inside LiveToAir. So I don't want to spend a huge amount of time here, but it's important just to understand certain things that we're able to do when we send out audio. So the first thing is any channel that's in LiveToAir has its own audio output. So you can turn around and say, I have the ability to get individual audio for each one of the guests that are coming in. I can send that audio out and say, by default, it's going out as NDI. But in addition, I could decide to send it out to something else. So in this case, I could turn around and say, gee, I'd really like to send this out Dante as well. So guest 1 is going to be Dante channel 1, guest 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is all baked in as the ability to not just send an NDI feed, but also a secondary source. If you were using SDI and that was how you want to do it, you could specify an SDI port and would send it out as embedded audio over that SDI port. The way LiveToAir is structured is that guests have on-air and off-air mode. So when they come in, they're off, and then you can switch them on-air. So we let you, corresponding to that, send audio, a different audio feedback for when a guest is off-air and when a guest is on-air. And that's really important, because the other thing that we do, and I'll talk about this more in general in a minute, is we create automatic mix-minus feeds for the guest. So when a guest is off-air, they're going to probably want to hear something that will be different from what they would hear when they were on air. So we let you do that switch automatically. So when you move the guest, you say off air, they are getting this audio feed. On air, they're getting this audio feed. And the way this works with automatic mix minus is we let you set up different mix minus groups in LiveToAir. So for this example, since we're using both a TriCaster and VMix, we've taken the first 4 channels of LiveToAir here, and we've set them up in a mix-minus group called VMix. But we've taken the next 4 channels, and we set them up in a mix-minus group called TC2E. So this now allows us in this system to have 2 distinct mix-minus groups. And this effectively could let us run 2 totally separate productions on the single system. But we are actually now working with 2 distinct switchers here. So this could be something where if you had like dual TriCasters, dual VMix systems, you could set this up and work with both of them simultaneously. And they could all be part. One's doing things around a venue, and the other's doing things around online. So you have the ability to do those types of things all from a single system. And the way we set that up, which can be very useful, is we let you just go and create basically any of you have built-in mix minus groups. You just name them, so it's easier to track what you're doing. And then you could take audio from that entire group and send it out in aggregate. So you could turn around and say, I want a feed of everybody in mix minus group 1 all together, single feed, or a feed in everybody in mix minus group 2, and that could be a separate feed. So different things we can do with that. But that should give you sort of a general sense of how all of this works. So we have that for the outputs, and we have that for the returns to set everything up. All right, so that's that's probably all the backdrop I want to give on the different pieces that we have working this together. But what I want to do next is just do a very quick talk about mix minus, because mix minus is a critical piece of everything you do when you're working with remote guests. So this may be redundant for a lot of you, but I just want to include this sort of as a level set for us. So I put together this diagram here of sort of understanding what we have in mix minus. And so if you look on the left-hand side of this diagram, you have our 4 guests that are coming in. And for argument's sake, we're sending them into inputs 1 to 4 of our studio mixer. Then on input 5, we're having the studio originated audio. So this would be something like your microphone, the microphone of the host. And this could be sort of a very simple case. So let's think about what we'd have to do to create mixes for these people. So the first group that we're creating a mix for is our audience. So that's really our main mix. And so when you'd set up a mixer, you usually will route all the audio sources that you want the audience to hear, your viewers to hear, out to your main mix. And that's exactly what we're doing here in this case. We're sending the studio audio that's coming in, plus the audio from all 4 LiveToAir guests. But what about the audio that guest 1 is going to hear? So they definitely want to hear the studio, and they definitely want to hear the other 3 guests that they're on with. But what they don't want to hear is themselves. And especially because when you think of how remote guests work, that audio has some latency until it gets to the studio, and then there's some latency when it gets back to the remote guest. So not only will they be hearing themselves, but they'll be hearing themselves with a delay. So when they talk, they get that echo back of their own voice. So what we want to do for them in creating this submix is we want to give them the studio audio, but we want to give them the audio for guests 2, 3, and 4, not for themselves. So it's the full mix minus LiveToAir guest 1. And that's what we're sending back to guest 1. And we do the same for guest 2, 3, and 4. They get the full mix, the other guest minus themselves. And that's where the term mix minus. It's the mix that we're sending minus some element that we're holding back to create a better experience for the person hearing that. So when we talk about LiveToAir or VMix, when you're using this to do a remote, it will handle the mix minus piece itself. So what you're effectively doing when you send this audio out, you send all the LiveToAir guests in because you need to create your main mix. You send the studio, again, that's part of the main mix. But when you're talking to what you have to send to the remote guest, you only need to send the studio originated audio, because the LiveToAir system will get that audio, and then for each guest, because the audio is coming through LiveToAir, it traps that audio and creates individual mixes, the correct mix minus. So LiveToAir guest 1, LiveToAir mixes guest 2, 3, and 4 plus the studio return audio and sends that back to guest 1. So that's where that mix minus comes in. In this case, it's done like I diagrammed it as a full mixer, but in LiveToAir and other automated tools, it is done, the whole mix minus piece is done remotely. And you send what would effectively be a global mix minus, the studio audio minus all of the guest audio. And the system takes it from there. Okay, so let's dive in now, and we'll sort of dig into how to configure this with, we'll first start with VMix over here and how we have this set up. So what I wanted to do in setting this up was to create a basically a single bus for the audio that we're sending back to guest, and another bus for the audio that we are sending out to our audience. So in this case, the bus master is for the audience. And so anytime we have a guest that will be live on air, so let me sort of switch over to, like, sorry, let me get the mouse back on the screen here. Sorry, lost my mouse for a second here. All right. I don't know what's going on. Lost my mouse, but so what we have when we have this on air is we want to turn around and say each guest that's on air is going to be routed to the master audio, and the host and any other microphones or data or audio sources inside of this are going to be routed also to the master. And this gives me now, so the master is going to take all the live-to-air guests that are live, and it's going to take my host and a mixer and send that out the master. What I want to return to the remote live-to-air guests, though, is what I'm sending down bus A. And so whenever I set up bus A, right now, bus A is really just going to be, it's just going to be around the two audio sources we have from the studio, which will be the host audio, and then I have just sort of a mixer. It could be anything else that I have. So these are the two sources that are going to be routed out. So if I look here at my mixer, I have those routed so the host is always going out master, and the host is always going back to the guests that are in sort of waiting in the green room if I want. But typically, what you'll do is, and we'll go to that, you can send this back very differently. So for this case, what I will do is I will turn around and say the host goes out the master, and what we'll do is we'll route the master audio back to the remote guest. So we'll turn these off here. So now what I'm having is guest host going out master, and anytime the remote guests want to hear the host, they'll listen in on the master audio, because the only time they'll be listening when they're off air is when they are when they're set up to hear the audio from the studio. When they are on air, that's when we're going to use guest A, bus A, because we want to make sure that instead of sending the audio to the remote guest, that's the full mix, the full master mix, that we're actually just sending the audio to the guest of the host and any other audio sources from the studio. So sorry if that was a little confusing, but that's really what's going on here. The off-air guests will hear the master audio, and the on-air guests will just hear the host and any other studio-originated sources. So that's how we have this set up. We've actually done a little automation. So I want to show how this would work with automation for handling this. So right now, if you look here at the remote guests, so REMs 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all set up. And right now, they're not being routed anywhere. So these guests are all off air. So what is being heard by these remote guests right now is they're seeing a green room. So let me sort of call that up on the side over here so you can see. So this is the green room that we have set up for the guests. The guests are all off air. So they are hearing whatever's going on the studio. So the host is talking on air, and they're hearing that, so they can follow along with the program. However, they will, because LiveToAir is creating its own mix minus, when they're off air, they all hear each other as a mix minus, but that's not being fed out into the studio. When they go live, that's when we do the switchover. When they go live, they'll just hear the host and the studio audio, and they'll hear any other guest, but they're not hearing the master feed, because LiveToAir is now creating that special mix for them. They don't need to hear themselves back, and that's where we get that mix minus coming in. So the way we did this from automation, okay. So I keep losing my mouse here, so I apologize for that. There. Give me a second here, guys. I apologize, but I've just lost my mouse cursor, so let me see if I can figure out how to get this. All right. All right. So sorry about that. So let's take a look here. I'm going to go up to settings, and we have this set up as shortcuts. And so if I go into the shortcuts, what I have now are shortcuts set up to put guests on air and to take guests off air. So this first shortcut, I'll sort of dig into it, is a small script that we set up, which allows me to tell LiveToAir to basically go on air, and it's telling VMix to route this audio to the master bus. So that's very simply what we're doing. So if you look at this and the way we have this set up, I come here and I just have a button to do this. Let me sort of get out of this. So if you look down at LiveToAir guest 1, when I press this live, you now see that they are routed to the master. And if we switch over to LiveToAir, you can see that I put this guest on air now. So that's the sort of red indicator and on air. And if I click it off air, let me just sort of push that in, same button push, I go there, and if we switch back to the VMix screen, you'll see now that we are no longer on the master. We've shut master off. So it's a very simple mechanism, but it's leveraging the automation capabilities in both platforms and using a single VMix key press to route messages both to VMix and to the remote platform. And the way I did that is I'm actually leveraging something that's baked into VMix, which is the ability to take and effectively embed a web browser into VMix. It's a capability that's been in VMix. But what I'm doing, instead of using this to display a web page, I'm using this to talk to a site using HTTP commands. So it's something that could be very useful. In here, I mean, you can sort of see this is just the commands that are going on. So when I click and send a command, it's actually driving that through my web browser up here that I set up inside VMix. So it's a useful way when you need to push HTTP out of VMix to do that. And it works fine with setting up basically like a standard, GET command, and that will work fine for almost everything you want to do for doing remote control. So that's how we set that up in VMix. So it's, hopefully this was clear. The tricky part in thinking of this is when guests are off air, you want them to hear the full master because you want to hear everything that's going on air. That's how the guest stays connected. When the guest goes on air, what you want them to hear is just the studio audio coming into them, because you are basically in something like LiveToAir, you are having that component create the guest mix for them when they're on air, so they hear the other guests that are on air. So it's almost counterintuitive. When they're live on air, you want them to hear a sort of a stripped down mix, and when they are off air, you want them to hear the full master mix. So, but that's, once you get that, then it will definitely make more sense. So let's take a look at doing this now on the trial. Oh, let's actually jump in and we have a few more comments over here. So we have Randall is talking. He says, using LTA mix minus is assuming you are not doing any additional software audio processing. So that is correct. So if you want to use the mix minus in LiveToAir, that is done or within LiveToAir itself. If you are doing audio processing, what you can do is you can create individual outputs for those guests and then process that audio, but then you would need to create the individual mixes for each one of those guests, the true mix minus, sort of going back to that diagram where you would be creating the individual mixes that those guests would hear. And one of the things to keep in mind with that is in LiveToAir, you get a separate audio mix for on-air and off-air. So that would be a whole nother level of things you'd have to handle yourself. So for instance, if you had, say, 4 guests that were connected, but you only wanted to bring them on 2 at a time, you would have to have a way when I brought the guest 1 and 2 on air that I would make sure that the other guest could hear everything going on in the studio with guests 1 and 2, but they wouldn't be conversational anymore with guests 1 and 2. You don't want the off-air guest talking and the on-air guest hearing that. So that could be something where you would have to make sure that you changed all that routing between moving on air and off air, either just muting it or doing something else. But the goal with having dual mix minus groups, basically an on air and an off air, was that the guest off air could still all talk with each other, could still listen to the show and not interfere at all with what was going on with the guest on air. So that's something to consider. But so let's see. American Newscape saying better late than never. It's funny because I think one of these things is when you learn stuff when you actually need to use it, and that's something that we've always found too. So we have Urban Media Showcase saying he's new to scripting. What is the best way to start learning the code? So there's a few things. So we've done things on VMix scripting specifically. So the easiest way to start with scripting in the VMix world is start with working with the shortcuts. And what scripting will let you do is to take and combine shortcuts in a list. So you do something like API.function, and then your shortcut name, the input, and any values or arguments that you'd have for that. There's a whole directory of shortcuts, VMix shortcuts, on the VMix site. Just type VMix 26 shortcuts, and you'll get to the page and be able to go through that. Once you've done that, that will give you a sense of how to interact with VMix elements specifically. Anything that goes beyond that for scripting is then going to have you start to learn things around actual like Visual Basic and .NET. And so it's more complicated. So we've done shows. We had sort of an intro to VMix scripting parts 1 and 2. I think we did that last season, or maybe even 2 seasons ago. Can't even remember. But yeah, we started a while ago with that. And that's probably a good place where it breaks you into starting with the API functions with the shortcuts and then going into sort of more Visual Basic type code and moving from there. But it really, the best way to do it also is to look in the VMix forums, and they have things that are called scripting for dummies. And that's another place you can look at examples that people have to sort of walk you through all of that. And that should help get you started. But always, if you want to tune in here, that's something that we tend to cover as well. So hopefully that will get you on the path. So let's see. Bill Corkery says, are there plugins to avoid in order to not introduce latency? Sorry if this has been covered. Every plugin is going to introduce some latency. So we sort of start with that. Anything that's going to do intense processing will have higher latency. I don't have specific ones I tell anybody to avoid, but if you use certain plugins to do different types of effects or different types of voice sculpting, which could be much more intensive, where you're adding, de-essers and EQ and compression, in addition to, the standard, level gain types of functions, those could introduce more latency. And you can get around that by simply dialing in a slight audio delay to make sure that things line up. A slight video delay to make sure that things line up with the audio. So that's something you can do in VMix to try to balance that out. But yeah, it's with all these things, it's really what's acceptable latency to your viewing community to see whether they feel comfortable with what they see there or not. So that's probably as good an advice as I could give you on that. So and then we have Urban Media. Urban Media, you are quite welcome. We have Ryocaster. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping around here. So Ryocaster is greetings from Brazil. Is there any way to run more than one music playlist on VMix? So I believe that you can run, you can have multiple audio playlists running simultaneously, I believe. Now, this is something I tested. but VMix allows multiple live audio sources, live loops and other things. So I would assume that that would work with playlist as well. And then you could mix them. I don't know how granularly you would be able to mix between the two of them. So if you wanted to do something like this as sort of a DJ thing where you're moving between two virtual turntables, I don't know how well that would work. But clearly you can take in multiple audio sources simultaneously playing and mix those all together. Sorry if I can't be more specific on that. So, all right. Well, you're welcome, everybody. Hopefully this was helpful to you. So JP is saying, this has been great. He'd like to see you talk about XML tags using data sources to feed :1 : name into VMix titles. That is something I would be happy to do. We're going to do a deeper dive into :1 right after the main show. We're going to do that in our post show. So we'll go into that. So thank you, JP. Okay, so let's now look at doing this same thing with TriCaster instead of doing this with VMix. But to get started, let me actually jump over to LiveToAir, and I want to show you sort of what we have here. So let me just bring these people off air here. So in LiveToAir, what you'll notice is we have these first four inputs set up to work with VMix. So if I click on any of these and you look here, you can see this is the return from VMix, and that's the feed that's coming, the live feed that's coming to our green room and our live feed. But if I've set up channels 5, 6, 7, and 8 to work with my TriCaster. So if I click over here on the TriCaster, now what you'll notice is I was feeding that slide from the TriCaster, and so that's my live feed is this this still slide I have up here from Mix Minus, and you can see we're using the same host video, and we have channels 5, 6, 7, and 8 sitting down here for our TriCaster system. So what I'm going to do to sort of switch over between the two systems is I'm just going to go up into LiveToAir, and I'm going to drop and clear out each of my guests. And then what I can do now is just go in and I will add guest 5, guest 6, and guest 7 are now going to be all set up. And I will switch over to our host video as our output video. And now you see that I've basically moved from one system to another system, and this now preserves all the mix minuses and everything else that you needed on the LiveToAir side. So this is an easy way to move guests around. And that's something which we'll talk a bit about when we talk about call-in-one in the post show, is that I could have a guest come in on call-in-one, and I could then drop them from call-in-one and move them over to LiveToAir to join a panel or something. So you have a lot of flexibility for how you work with guests in the LiveToAir ecosystem. So this is just one of the things, the ability to have multiple mix minus groups across multiple systems all set up. So let's actually now switch over to the TriCaster UI, and we'll take a bit of a look now at how we've set up these same things inside of our TriCaster. Now I have some audio coming in on the host that I wanted to just have to show you sort of your moving bars, but it's actually pretty annoying audio. So I'm just going to leave this muted for here, but I just wanted you to see that you can have audio coming in, and this will be the audio we'd be routing. So let's look at what we're doing for each of these guests. So in the TriCaster, the way we have this set up is the off-air guest will, just like in VMix, the off-air guest will receive whatever's going out, the master audio, because that's what we want to have set up. So inside of LiveToAir, our off-air return audio source is our master, because that means the guests can talk to each other. They're all off-air, but they'll hear everything that's going on live on air, so they're up to date. What we then do is for each of these guests, when we want to bring them on air, if you look in LiveToAir, you have this little gear on top of each one of the input channels. So this gives me the ability, so in this case, I'm pulling in everything from our, from any of our input sources here. And this is giving me now effectively the same sort of thing. Here's my LiveToAir's guests 5, 6, 7, and 8 coming in. And I can say, how do I want to route them? So when somebody is going to be connected, I want these guests to be routed out the master. And when they're not connected, I want them to, to be basically not routed into master. So let me take a look. I have guest 1 here. So when I switch them on air, it would be the master. When I switch them off air, it will turn all the routing off. And this is, again, very similar to what we were doing with VMix, where we had the master and we had bus A. We're doing the basic equivalent thing here of we're saying we have the master is what's feeding live, and we have aux1. But it's the same core concepts here. aux1 is what we're sending back to the remote guest. So if we go back and we come over here and look at the host is going out the master, and they're also going out aux1 because we want the remote guest to hear them. What you don't want, though, is you don't want the remote guest to be heard on air. So that's why when we have them coming in, we are basically saying there's no master audio coming from that remote guest. And that's what we've done for each of these 4 remote guests. It's the same thing. So if I go in and turn, guest 2 and I put them on air, you can see they go to master. And when I put them off air, that gets cleared out. So again, very, very simple for how we handle all of that audio routing. And that's what we've basically done. It's the same core thing. But now the way that we did this with automation, like in VMix, we used a shortcut setup. And those shortcuts basically allowed us to tell LiveToAir, put the guest on air, and it told the VMix mixer sort of audio router to configure correctly to put that guest on master or not. We're going to do the same thing, but we're going to be doing this with macros inside of the TriCaster. And now, if you remember, this is something we talked about before in, I think, our previous show, where we talked about using macros in a basic way. But the way we set this up inside of the TriCaster here is, let's go into configure macros. And I have these session macros. And so I've set this up so I have a macros which will take a specific LiveToAir channel and turn it on or off air. And then I have the ability to turn around and say, I have macros set up to turn guest 1 off air or on air, and guest 2, 3, and 4. So this basically sets up everything that we need. So let me basically go in and we'll look at what I have to bring guest 1 on air. So let me edit this and we'll come into here, and I'm going to introduce a couple of new concepts here. So one of the things that the TriCaster has sort of baked into its macro capabilities is, at least this is on the TC2 and the TC1 Pro. The early ones don't have this capability, but I wanted to show this for completeness here, is you have the ability to set up variables. And what this lets you do is, when I want to go and say, what's the active channel? I have the ability now to just say, all of my code here is going to be the same for my macros for channels 1, remotes 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'm just coming back and saying, in this case, my active channel is 1. I'm talking with remote guest 1. And so what I want to do is I want to say, okay, I want you now to play a macro by name, which is the LiveToAir channel on air, which we just talked about. I'll show you that in a minute. And then what I want you to do is basically change the routing from master aux1, aux2, aux3 to match the following. Now, you don't have to worry about the details here, but this is basically, say, the routing mask. This is complicated. You can just sort of record how this looks. But what I'm doing is saying, for channel 1, take the routing mask, and this is on input 1 because we've married it up, and the routing mask is turn it all on. And for all the other inputs, for all the other routes, for aux 1, 2, 3 here, for input with your global variable 1, your active channel being 1, set those all to not route. So this is what we're doing here. And so we're using this variable, but the other cool thing with the way these variables work is, so let me get out of here. If you look at the LiveToAir channel on air, we are using that same macro. We're dealing with channel 1. But if you remember, we took and moved our guest on LiveToAir from channels 1 to 4 to channels 5 to 7, because the TriCaster is pulling in channels 5 to 7. So we've just created a new global variable here that says, which LiveToAir channel do we want? Well, we're going to compute the expression that takes our active channel, that variable, which in this case is set to 1, and we're going to add 4 to that. So that means now when I send the request to LiveToAir to turn on a specific channel, it's turning around and saying, I'm now taking whichever guest channel it is, guest 1, and I'm adding 4 to that because LiveToAir is channels 5. And that's what I'm here. So I'm basically saying, put this, I'm sending an on-air command to LiveToAir for channel 5. And that's what we're doing here. So we're using some very basic sort of integration logic, calculation logic to do a little more clever things with the way we set up LiveToAir, the way we interact with LiveToAir and with our sort of remote guest routing. So the other thing you'll notice here is I actually have LTA IP. That's another global variable we set up. And, you know, just for completeness of showing it, we have this set up here, which basically says, what is the internal IP address of the LiveToAir system I'm working with? So if I move between systems, all I have to do is change that IP address to whichever system I'm working with, and all of my macros now will work with that new IP address. So I think you can see that even though, like in VMix scripting, you can do tons of things because you're basically having a full, you know, VB.NET framework to work with, or at least a fairly significant subset of that. Here, sort of in the baseline, without going into detailed scripting, you can start to do things which use variables, and there are other ways to do conditionals and other things which we haven't gotten into. But this means that I can take the same basic macro set and move it around between different boxes, and I won't have an issue because all I'm doing is changing the IP address in one location, and all of my macros then work with that. So that's something else to keep in mind here. But again, if you think back on if I switch back over to LiveToAir, and we sort of jump into the settings, sort of the audio settings over here, let's see. You'll see that this is exactly what we're doing down here. For the off-air, what we have is our out 1, which is our master output. So that's the first output we have for audio. Mix 1, the audio for that is called out 1, and that's our master. So when they're off air, they hear everything that's going on in the studio, and when they're on air, they're getting out 2, which is aux 1. So naming conventions can at least something to be desired because they can't rename them, but that means that they are now, when they're on air, they're hearing the sources, the audio being sent back is just the studio originated sources, and LiveToAir is actually creating the mix minuses. And even though we list this as one, like TC2E is the mix minus, there's 2 groups here. There's everybody that's on air in the TC2E, and then there's everybody that's off air in the TC2E. So even though this looks like one mix minus group, it's actually split into 2, the off air and the on air mix minus groups within that one labeled group, TC 2E. So that's basically what's happening. I'm sending this out, and all I'm doing with the macros is I'm just changing what is that audio from this remote guest going to master or not. And I'm just pulling that on or off. So it's a very simple way. If I wanted to do something more complicated, it's very, very possible. What you would end up doing is you could take and say, if we jump back over to the TriCaster here, if I came in here and said, I actually have somebody that I need to bring in, that's another remote guest off of, some of like a live view system or something. What I can do is I could come back and say, I'm going to send them audio back from one of these other aux groups. So if I just sort of cleared this and said, okay, when I want this guest to hear my other guest, I would say, okay, when a guest goes on air, I would now send their audio, their live-to-air audio. In addition to sending it out to master, I'd now also send it out to this other aux channel. So let me sort of clear this one as well. So they'd be going out master, and they'd be going out the secondary aux channel. So that means that the host and all my on-air live-to-air guests could be going out aux 2, which if I had a guest somewhere else coming into something like a live view, that would be the audio feed I'd send them. They'd hear all the on-air guests, and they would hear the host and any other studio-originated audio. But it's still the same core type of framework. And this makes it very easy. So if I have any complexity in this, you really are looking at saying, as long as I can create a unique mix back to that group of guests, whether it's coming from LiveToAir, where it's just one feed, or something like LiveView, where it's one feed to one guest, so it's a one-to-one versus a one-to-many, but that's all you're doing. And hopefully that makes it a little clearer with how you would work with even more complicated setups. But I figured at this, we wanted to really just capture this as a baseline of what is possible with setting up basic mixes with something like LiveToAir. So let's see. We got a couple more comments here, and then what we'll do is we'll jump into the post show, and I will reset things here to bring up call-in-one, and we can start to take a look at that as well. So let's see. We have American Newscape saying, see, that's amazing versatility. Yeah, Newscape, I definitely appreciate that. So there's a lot of people much smarter than me who work here at Neural Net that I really owe a lot of thanks and a lot of credit to for everything that you've seen in the product. I just get to be the face of it, so I get the easy job here. So now we also have Jocko. I apologize if I'm probably would butcher your last name, so I will try to, we'll just go by Jocko. So forgive me for that. He says he's unfortunately at work, but luckily I can rewatch later. And thank you for being part of the community here. I really do appreciate it. So let's see. So we have Marco saying a very well-engineered solution. So Marco, thank you for that. So I think what probably makes the most sense now is for us to wrap up the show here, and then we'll jump into the post show, and we can go through call-in-one and any other questions, because I know there were a few that came up. So I'll see you in a few. If you can hang around, that would be great. Take care. Bye. Hello, welcome to the post show here. So thank you all for everybody that was able to hang out for the post show. Hopefully, we'll be able to go into enough detail about anything we covered in the main show, as well as give everybody an overview of our All-in-One product, which we know there's been people asking. But I'm told we have a caller online here. So.
Do you need me to say something?
Hello.
Hello?
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. So, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm doing great. And it's really funny you talking about audio and everything like that. So, I have these really cool headphones from Rode, and these are the second pair that broke.
That is
So-
painful.
So I pulled my Plantronics from my work computer. I plugged it in, had to reboot VMix so it could be a secondary audio out. I'm like, I'm so glad I listened to Streaming Alchemy.
Well, it's really good to see you. I appreciate all you do on your show as well. So that's definitely something that I think it's good to have just a lot of different voices out there that are that are sort of talking to the things that they're passionate about, that are core to who they are. And that's something I think, if everybody with sincerely held beliefs on something, that's, I love to hear people talk that way with an open mind and sort of an open heart to, other opinions. And I think that's one of the great things I think about your show. You really are, you're coming at things with a conviction and sort of an openness to engage that is really nice to see, and something that I think is very much needed. So
I appreciate that. I spent like the weekend watching your videos because I did the upgrade to 4K for VMix.
Yeah.
And I'm not lying to you. I am so much fun here programming and configuring everything. And I was like, I should do this. Oh, and I can do this. And I'm writing this. And now I'm like, okay, so I'm going to get rid of the 91 gig file that I was overlaying in my video. And now I can build something completely different. And now I figured out I'm going to do three countdown timers and have them all trigger something so that I'm not waiting.
Yep.
And
yeah, no, it's really a lot of fun. I mean, I think when you get into automation, it's a very cool side to everything we do. It's sort of, you just look at it as a world of possibilities. All this stuff is open. It's like, wow, now I don't have to have octopus arms, to do everything at once that I need to do. I can just go in here and I can press one button. It's like triggering things off. And it's funny because that's one of the things that if you think about what we have set up in general, is that we were able to, using a single button press, talk to two distinct systems, on two different machines, to get things to happen. And you stop thinking about that. So I don't know whether you were showing something. We have you on sort of half a screen. So let me see if we can get your full screen here. I don't have your audio.
sorry about that.
No, yeah.
Yeah, no, there you go. One of John's biggest fans. And let me show you this cool thing I put together. I built
Yep.
I built a web interface for me to control my show.
Fantastic.
And
yep.
it's off of my tablet touchscreen. I go through and I control it all. Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot to this. And I think as people become really comfortable with automation, it lets you become more ambitious with what you want to do and how you want to integrate different things into your production. So that's, something that if you think about it, you've evolved as, with your show and with the quality and the composition. And that's something that when you add automation into Mix now, it's like, wow, now I have a whole new set of things, and I can trigger things to start over here and pull them in over there. And it just opens up a world of new possibilities. So definitely something to.
Yeah. Well, you get a lot of credit because you really inspired me to a lot. I'm like, I can do that. Oh.
I think that's really important for everybody. You know, it's you do things for everything in your life by challenging yourself to go to the next step. And I constantly find that the things that made things work for me is the people who showed me how to do things as I was sort of moving along the path. And it's still the case today. I mean, nobody knows, you know, I have so much stuff I want to learn and need to learn, and I only sort of half know, and I wish I really fully knew. So I think, you know, there's a bit of imposter syndrome that we're all going to feel as we do this. And that's totally cool because we all are doing that to a certain extent, but I'm very happy to sort of own what I don't know and own what I know, and, you know, learn from everybody that's willing to teach. So the way I.
Well, your check is in the mail. Okay.
Well,
the check is in the mail.
Oh, thank you, Val. I really appreciate you, joining us here.
Anytime.
So
have a great day, guys.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So let's see. So we have